So Book 7 of the Republic gives us Plato's cave. And this is one of the most famous images in all of philosophy. And it has to be understood in the context of the two other images which came before it, the sun and the divided line. And the divided line is particularly important because that gives us the distinction between what we can understand, episteme, and what we see, the illusions, the doxa. We go into that in more detail when we're looking at the divided line. Now, the story of the cave is told to Glaucon, and Glaucon is one of the more sympathetic pupils of Socrates. He's actually Plato's brother, and as Plato goes through life with the nickname the Broad, in my images, of course, I think of that as a sort of public schoolboy joke. He's not at all broad, he's got no shoulders. Glaucon is owl-eyed. In today's imagery, he'd probably be wearing glasses. There we are. We need to bear in mind all the time that this story is told by Plato in the context of education, specifically the education of a guardian. The story begins with a simple proposition.
Ithi ga anthropus ion en kategio ikisi
Spili o thee. Prisoners are kept facing a wall. They are bound by the feet and the neck so they cannot look round. Behind them are steps leading to the outside world which they cannot see, and above this is a giant fire. By the light of this fire they can see their own shadows. Now, there's a road or a walkway in front of this fire, along which are moved objects or puppets, and these cast an image on the wall that the prisoners mistake for reality. There are also echoes, which the prisoners believe are the voices of the shadows. It's a sort of primitive cinema. And this is an ancient version of the Karaiogus shadow play, which still goes on in Greece today. Puppetry, after all, is an old art. So, let's imagine, says Socrates, that one of these prisoners is released. This is a strictly passive operation. The prisoner is bewitched by the shadows in the cave on the walls and has no desire to change at all. He is dragged out. It's another instance of what I would call Socrates or Plato's educational violence. You get an example of this in the Meno. In the Meno, Socrates demonstrates how a slave boy can remember what he had apparently learnt before his birth in the world of the forms. Now, Socrates describes this process as something like electrification. And just before we get to the electrification image, a note about true belief and knowledge. And when does the one turn into the other? It's quite a difficult and a thorny problem which becomes very central to some of the debates in 20th century philosophy. But here in the Meno, Plato gives us an answer, and he gives it in terms of one of these myths, and the myth of Daedalus. Now, Daedalus, not only do we know him because he was cavorting around Crete and flying with Icarus too close to the sun, but he was also working as a sculptor, and he made mechanical statues that could move around on their own. Now, Socrates says that true belief is like one of these statues. So what does he mean? True belief is like a moving statue. Ah, there's a moving statue. It's exactly what it should be, but it was here a few minutes ago, and now it's gone. Oh, what? I'm a dutiful Greek. I'm going to scatter incense in front of my statue as part of my religious devotions. I'm off to scatter incense. Oh, there, it's gone. It's not there. I can't rely on this statue because it's always moving. So what we have to do is anchor our statue so that it remains in one place. And the same thing with our true belief. We have to anchor our true belief and turn it into knowledge. True belief we might get from the lecture room or from a conversation. It may be correct, but it will only become knowledge with introspection, with thought. So, the slave boy who has no education is made to remember a complicated geometrical solution. But first, he must be shocked into realizing that he is genuinely ignorant. It's his moment of aporia, of doubt. He struggles for a solution. It's like being numbed or electrocuted by an electric fish, by a torpedo. It's his moment of pain. He feels stupid. But then, having hit rock bottom, he can move forward and remember the truth. So the image of pain in the Meno is specific and unpleasant. A metaphor, perhaps, but it's still nasty. There's also plenty of that in the cave. Not only is the cave a story of people who are being tortured in the first place, but they actually think it's better to be tortured than to be free. In the Meno, Plato compares the moment of aporia, the first step on the way to knowledge, as like being stung, like being electrified by an electric fish, by a torpedo. It's an image of violence, and the same image of violence is to be found in the story of the cave. Two things are important. Firstly, the prisoner is loosened, is released. The word is lysis. In Erasmian Greek, lusis, it's from the verb, the first verb you probably learn if you learn Greek, luo, luis, lui. And it becomes a technical term in Neoplatonism, and Neoplatonism underpins the developments in Judaism in the first century and the development of early Christianity. The second point is the prisoner is made to turn round. He's not just led out, he's made to turn round. The Greek word is periagon. He's made to examine his life. The unexamined life is not worth living. And finally, the third word, which needs emphasis, is physi. In 515c, it sounds a little scatological, but it means nature. And a rough translation is, in the course of nature, someone is released, someone is loosened. It's natural. It's natural to be educated. This is what Plato is saying, that the process of release from the cave is natural, that it's unnatural to be in the cave. The prisoner is led out, led up, dragged out by someone else. He's the passive agent in this story. But, of course, at the end of the story, he becomes the active agent because education confers responsibility. So, let's put all this together. The prisoner has been released. He's been dragged out of the cave. He's ascended up into the light. First he sees the fire, and he sees the puppeteers, then he sees the cave mouth and the steps, and he goes up, and his eyes cannot adjust to the light of the sun. So first he spends his time looking at reflections, and looking in the water, and looking at the night sky, until finally his eyes have adjusted and he can approach the sun. And once he's got that moment of enlightenment, he feels impelled to go back into the cave and tell everybody else. And here the story changes slightly, and we get an allegory of the life of Socrates himself, the person who goes back into the cave and tries to convince these prisoners who are bewitched by their primitive shadow play, by their primitive cinema, the person who tries to convince them that this is not the truth, that the truth is out there, the other prisoners will turn on him and kill him, as indeed Socrates was forced to drink hemlock and to die.